to see an organization with Norwa Bawa, the Washington Interfaith Alliance, I was doing today is we're now in Syria, and I wondered one related to the United States and Israel. What do you make concerned about 20 years in the Middle East, including the trade to Iraq and Israel, and trying to undermine it? Do you run into that in your organization when you talk? Subsequently, I also serve as director of Radio Free Iraq, which is an American-funded station designed to bring objective news about that country to the people of Iraq. Our guest today is Norwa Bawa. She is a co-chair, and I think I will include an Interfaith Alliance play an effective role. She works with culture in the D.C. area. There will be more open to the intervention of free relations station, which people when they vote, you set forth its views on what the solution should be. The Washington Interfaith Alliance in the Middle East Peace, of which she's co-chair, has been sponsored by the Network Corporation in June 2008, and the Best which for several years was broadcast from the National Cathedral and simultaneously from a Lutheran church in Bethlehem. The Washington Interfaith Alliance Police Peace also works with coalition groups like Sharing Jerusalem, Code and the Jewish Voice for Peace, sponsoring events such as Pastor Vigil for Gaza, which gather a large crowd in China is the area that could support the Israeli peace survived by the president. Its ongoing mission is to educate Americans about the Middle East conflict, appealing to the church community. Norwa Bawa originally part of teaching at two universities in the occupied Palestinian territory. People, of course, she offered executive U.S. learning methods that were both universities which have English, engineering, and environmental. But certainly as an example, she was director of graduate studies work. People from international studies at the American Border was established, and international student advisor at the Catholic University of Norwa Bawa was born in Vienna, line between the Midwest, the U.S. government, and the United Education Group, as well as the BA in International Relations from the University of Chicago. So I would like to welcome to our program. It's very nice to have you. You certainly have a great deal of contemporary new experience in the area, unless you're in the occupied territory. I'd like to know a little bit about yourself. What attracted you originally to the Middle East and to the Israeli-Palestinian issue there? If you don't mind the story, I once visited the first time the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and I was headed to the mosque after looking at the Palestinian guards straight at me. When I spoke to him in Arabic, I said I was in Miami, and he wanted to speak roughly, and he gave me a guide for the mosque. Very good.
My daughter, and then you like Palestine because people are so nice to you. And I said, well, it's interesting. People in Palestine have great respect for each other. People have great respect for that, and they have very open to foreigners.
Can you tell me also about the Washington International Alliance? What is that organization mainly do? That's very true. As an American, you're fairly rare in the West Bank. I think perhaps you're suggesting that in terms of trying to convince people that this is an area where you can make progress and that they should be concerned about suddenly another Africa, because I make the own experience, at least at one university in this area, where this commemorates negative
and there are a lot of Americans in that situation, and we do it. They will leave the country, and we break the law back to the federal war. We've been doing that for years because they're all fighting hard. They're doing work in the hospitals in Jerusalem, and now imagine our right now telling us the government of Israel. I want that to make you a name in a number of hostility in our area, but the nation is national organization. We and one of the Palestinians together in unsuccessfully administered you are particularly worried about we had Jerusalem, and that's why that point you don't know about that day. If you ask a religion, what do we do? Every situation is what we did, whatever happens.
I guess a lot of power to all of us.
I think that you're trying to even over the whether the students they were learning was there more active control. There are strong opinions as to what the outline there was there. My impression from indirect involvement in the issue, including at the drill, is the effort to see just the two sides equal to need to both sit down and negotiate together has really not worked. And we need a more active United States role. After all, most people would say the outline of settlement is pretty clear and it involves going back. I know I'm speaking especially to retired audiences that I found now, and there have 507 viewing interested in this and my issue, but perhaps we'll take the opportunity
I understand that the speaker are remarkable.
The current Prime Minister is doing a very good job of organizing life here to your audiences, have organized wider and like the audience you have who are committed to life in Puerto Rico and or where
they were people who had gotten a very nice deal
including the point you find in the media and other places a lot more discussion of the issue. The audience is perhaps a little better informed, more balanced than they were 50 years ago. When you listen to media and that does it affect your audience?
We normally use Israel. I won't say I don't read really improve Israeli criminal way area.
But that's a good point. We're running out of time, so it's nice to end on that beat note. Thank you very much, Norwa, for coming to talk with us so you think today and to share your experience on the way that you have become more humanitarian than it was well. Besides, I have influenced the whole process, and perhaps the idea that as the war in Iraq has wound down, it's taken so much of the attention away from other events in the Middle East. There are so many other people with the news about Haiti and so forth relying for more than 50 years. Maybe you would agree it's hard to keep issues like that, like us and the news, and in terms of providing motivation to terrorists to draw the attention of everyone.
I think that went back to his friend General Mullen to make sure that we keep people upset. He went back there.
That certainly is. The Gaza issue has now been on the agenda now for several years without any real change. So I suppose that in a way there is some fatigue trying to do, but the mood of the students, good luck from what you're saying. They'd be serious about their education worth that hard because it calls into question problems for the future they should deal with. Motivated anti-terrorism policy and with the threat.
Typically, students in Palestine study very hard. It's very about blowback. That's we know now beginning to learn lately about the Palestinian society.
You find it also interested in the West Bank.
The whole family makes them very stable in order for a young person to go to university. And some of the kids who are there are not really, would not really have gone under their own auspices, would not really have wanted to go, but their parents wanted to go, so they stay out of trouble. Chose An-Najah instead in Nablus because I would have been there at the time of the invasion.
We're coming very shortly to a commercial break, so we can perhaps pick up that issue. Welcome back to CNI Jerusalem Calling, your source for unfiltered Middle East talk radio. I'm your host, David Newton. Well, Ms. Bawa, back to you, and I hope you could tell us a little more about your feelings about the West Bank itself.
I was there on two separate occasions. I was teaching at Al-Quds University, which is actually Jerusalem University, but their campus is in a small village called Abu Dis, which is separated now from Jerusalem by the separation wall. So every time we went into, the Palestinians, most of them on the West Bank cannot go to Jerusalem. But every time I went to Jerusalem, we passed the checkpoint and went through checking all the passes and so on. Anyway, I taught at Al-Quds University in the English department. I was one of 2 or 3 expatriate teachers, and I had wonderful students. The thing that they liked most about me was that I was an American, and I was from outside, and I cared about them, and I cared about their situation. They were also very challenging in that the teaching methods are very different there, and so they had a lot to adapt to with American teaching methods, but I think they did a pretty good job, and at the end, it was a wonderful experience anyway. Of course, the West Bank, for me, it was relatively easy because I didn't have problems getting around, but for Palestinians, there are many checkpoints. I think there are almost 600 or maybe over 600 now. People who live in the south can't visit their relatives in the north. People who are married to Jerusalemites who live in Bethlehem can't go to Jerusalem and can't live in one place. They have to live separately. I observed these things. As a foreign guest, the situation was nothing like what it is for Palestinians. And, of course, the people in Palestine are wonderfully welcoming. I never met anyone who was not welcoming. And then the second time I taught at Al-Najah, which is the National University in Nablus, which is in the north of the West Bank. And I had this very similar experience. There I taught English to people in the sciences who were not nearly as keen on learning English, although I kept telling them that they ought to be, because as an engineer you better keep up with what's going on, and you won't be doing it in Arabic, you'll be doing it in English. So,
yes, certainly.
But that was a challenge. The overall experience is the people.
Could I ask you to turn back to the Washington Interfaith Alliance? What do you see as your main accomplishments with the alliance as a group, and have your efforts drawn any particular opposition, any detractors? Do you get negative feedback?
Not that I know of. As I said, our major effort is outreach to community groups, and as such, we haven't received any criticism. One of our events, which was on the Capitol grounds in June of 2008, the Nakba commemoration, I think, was a very important event, and we had speakers, people who were all living in Jerusalem in 1948, and they talked about their experiences having to leave. The Nakba is another word for Holocaust, means the catastrophe.
The mirror image, I think.
The mirror image?
Well, it's the opposite side of what happened in 1948 to the independence of Israel.
Oh, yes, in that sense. I thought you meant literally.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. It is what happened to the Palestinians when Israel became a state. Or before that, actually, the clearing, the ethnic cleansing, as it's called now, began in the year before, in 1947, and over 750,000 people were displaced, either their villages torn down or they were just chased out of their villages, and many of those people now live in refugee camps. That is an event that is not looked at, really, at all by Americans or by our media. We look at 1948 as the birth of the State of Israel. We don't look at it as the death of many people in Palestine.
Yes, I asked because I know from experience, at least with one university in this area, when this was commemorated on the 50th anniversary of Israel, it drew a lot of opposition, and there was a lot of negative attempts against them for commemorating something which was seen as negative.
Well, in our case, I'm not aware, and certainly nothing happened at the event itself. But in Israel, I know you're aware of this, that they are working on a law to outlaw the word Nakba in the educational system. Imagine outlawing the word Holocaust, telling our educators they couldn't use the word Holocaust. And that's under review in Israel today.
That is certainly unfortunate in terms of our country, which professes free speech, to outlaw a particular word. How does the organization, the Alliance, work with other organizations, especially outside of the Washington area?
Well, for example, we had we sponsored a Sabeel conference. Sabeel is a religious group from Palestine which works on nonviolence and peace issues in a nonviolent way. And they are located in America. They have a headquarters in Oregon, I believe. And they have conferences all over the country. Every few months there's a conference. So we had a conference here in October, and people came from all over the country to that conference. We had some wonderful workshops and speakers, including the UN Ambassador Richard Falk, the UN Ambassador on Humanitarian Affairs, and we had a lot of representation from the religious community. That's one way that we collaborate with other groups. And then we have there are events here, sort of ad hoc events that are participated in by many groups, like the Gaza demonstration that we had at the end of December, and there were people there from all sorts of Palestine affinity groups here in the Washington area.
Do you have any sense when you see your audiences of a wider participation beyond people who are committed to supporting the Palestinians or Arab Americans particularly, or Palestinians?
You mean at our speaking events or any event?
Well, at any events, including the public events.
Yes.
Do you think you're reaching a wider audience now?
Well, it's hard to know, but thinking about that last vigil, there were a lot of people who took flyers. There were a lot of people who stood around and listened to speaking. There were people who seemed not to know anything about it, and there were people who just walked by. Now, I'm not a good crowd gauger, but there were a lot of people walking around and looking. I can't tell you what the effect was upon them, however. I mean, that would be our wish, that we would have more exposure and that we would have more opportunity to talk with people about this and not just street events or so on. I mean, that's not we do that in coalition with other groups, but it's not our main focus to have public demonstrations.
Yeah, I have the hope perhaps the idea that as the war in Iraq has wound down, it's taken so much of the attention away from other events in the Middle East that people would then discover we have this underlying issue for more than 50 years, which is certainly affects attitudes towards Americans, and in terms of providing motivation for terrorists is something that should draw the attention of every American.
Well, I think it was General Mullen, if I'm not mistaken, who recently said that the Palestine-Israel conflict was the root of much of the terrorism, of much of the conflicts in the Middle East in general, from Indonesia to Morocco.
Yes, no, that's right too, but I think there's a great reluctance in the United States to draw attention to that fact because it calls into question how exactly we should deal with the anti-terrorism policy and with the threat that it brings to us.
As far as terrorism is concerned, we know about blowback, and we know who equipped the Mujahideen, who are now, some of them are now Al-Qaeda. So, yes, it makes a very sticky wicket.
Certainly does. Welcome back to CNI Jerusalem Calling. I'm your host, David Newton, and we're talking this week with Ms. Norwa Bawa, the co-chair of the Washington Interfaith Alliance for Middle East Peace. I would like to ask you, since we're now in an interesting period of relations between the United States and Israel, what do you make personally of the current turmoil, the current dispute that's going on between our two governments?
I think it's very unfortunate that the present government in Israel is taking positions that it is. It's very much showing its disdain for the United States, and it takes the United States for granted, although we've been giving them over $3 billion a year since, 79? They don't seem to have much respect for our country.
Some people say, and I think I would include myself in that if we are going to play an effective role in this situation, at some point there will have to be some kind of disagreement or confrontation, which the United States will have to set forth its views on what the solution could be, particularly because now there are 500,000 settlers in the occupied territories, including occupied East Jerusalem.
We've said a great deal, or our presidents over the past some years have said a great deal about how they would like things to be or how they might like things to be, but there have never been any consequences for Israel leaving the negotiations. In all these years, we really haven't gotten much done because they negotiations get stuck and break off and so on, and there's absolutely no consequence for Israel for not proceeding with it.
Some people have told me who visited the area that although hopes were raised considerably by the president's speech in Cairo, that until recently the feeling was it was, again, only talk and that the United States wouldn't actually follow through. But at this point, hopes are being raised again.
Certainly mine are, and many people that I talk to feel that way. And I think informally there are a lot of people who believe that the president would like to make a just and peaceful settlement. But whether the president can do that without a lot of other people supporting him is the question.
Do you find on your trips that Palestinians, again, make this distinction between the policies of the U.S. government and the United States as a country and the American people?
The people of the United States. They're very open and very friendly and warm. They're warm to everybody who's a guest. I mean, that's the Middle Eastern way. But
yes, that's certainly
true. They're particularly happy to see Americans, and particularly happy to let us know that they see that difference, that our country's policy and the people who come to see them are viewed entirely differently.
If you don't mind a story, I once visited for the first time the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and I was headed for the mosque. A very tough-looking Palestinian guard came straight at me, and when I spoke to him in Arabic and said I was an American, his attitude changed completely, and he gave me a guided tour of the mosque.
Of course. My daughter often tells me that you like Palestine because people are so nice to you. And I say, well, you know, it's interesting. People in Palestine have great respect for elders. People have great respect for teachers. And they are very open to foreigners. Mm-hmm. So I guess I fit all these categories. And as such, I am treated a lot better than I might be here.
Yes, that's true. I have the same feeling. Certainly, that's very true. As an American, you're fairly rare in the West Bank.
Actually not. You'd be surprised how many Americans I met there. Well, I didn't go to the whole West Bank, and of course there are cities like Nablus where you don't see that many Americans. But there are lots of religious presences there, as well as NGOs of secular types. And I was amazed at how many Americans I found there. At first, I had to renew my tourist visa every 3 months. And there are a lot of Americans in that same situation, and we do it. We leave the country, and we pay an airline ticket to come back and get another tourist visa. And I was shocked at people who'd been doing that for years because they feel that they're doing something really useful.
How did you find then, how do these Americans find the occupation authorities, the attitude towards them?
I think the main frustration, it's not hostility per se, but the main frustration both for foreigners and for Palestinians is the unpredictability of everything. You apply for a visa, you don't know if you'll get it. You ask for this, you don't know if you'll get it. If you want to go through a certain checkpoint, you don't know if it'll be open that day. You don't know if there'll be closures that day. Every situation is sui generis. As such, it just keeps people off balance.
You taught in 2 different universities. Were the students able to learn? Was there much in it? Of course, there are demonstrations, but were the occupation authorities interfering with their learning process?
During my time there, I think there was only one demonstration in Al-Quds. During my time there, it was very peaceful. And even in Nablus, which is very much under closure, and which, if young people try to get out of Nablus, young males particularly, they have a very, very hard time because the authorities believe that Nablus is a hotbed of activism or terrorism or something. But there were really, I don't think there were any demonstrations as such when I was there. There were meetings downtown supporting, but no negative demonstrations.
People say that the West Bank, with the current prime minister, he's doing a very good job of organizing life there to the extent he can, organizing security and life. Did you have a sense that everyday life is improving at all for people in the West Bank?
Well, you know, this move has happened since I've been back mostly. But I don't believe, from what I hear from my friends in Nablus in particular, for example, they say, they're opening some of the checkpoints and people who used to shop in Nablus are able to come in now, and it's good for the people in the markets and the business people. But I think most of the money from the U.S. has gone to the security, the Palestinian security forces. And as far as the economic situation in general, I don't think it can really improve in a permanent way until the area is welcoming to investment. Mm-hmm. So they're trying desperately to get people to invest, but people don't want to invest because they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
And, of course, the restrictions on movement, I think, have a significant economic effect on people as well, besides influencing their lives.
Absolutely. Palestine cannot export most of its produce, for example, to neighboring countries. They have to buy produce. They have to buy these things from Israel or just use their own, but they can't send it to Jordan. They can't send it to Turkey and so on. The biggest export from Palestine is building stones.
Building stones, yes. And
one of the vice presidents that Al-Quds told me one day when he went back to his friends in Wisconsin. He went to the University of Wisconsin. When he went back there, his friend said, "Why is there so much stone throwing?" And he said, "If you had seen the West Bank, you would know why, because there's nothing but stones. They're everywhere."
But the mood of the students was, from what you say, they seem to be serious about their education, working hard. So despite the problems for the future, they seem motivated to do their best.
Most of them are. Typically, students in Palestine study very hard. Education is valued greatly in Palestinian society. People will scrimp and save and put together the whole family's savings in order for a young person to go to university. And some of the kids who are there would not really have gone under their own auspices, would not really have wanted to go, but their parents want them to go so they stay out of trouble.
Ms. Bawa, let me ask you, if I could, once more about what Americans, the great majority of whom are not directly focused on the Middle East, need to know about what the United States and American entities are doing in Israel and Palestine. And I wonder one related question. Often those of us who are concerned about what is happening to the Palestinians are portrayed as somehow hostile to Israel or trying to undermine it. Do you run into that in your organization when you talk to people? And how can we best deal with these issues?
I have not run into that because the focus of my presentation is my own experiences. And I talk a lot about students and life on the West Bank and so on. It may have to do with who comes to the meetings. I've been challenged on data, on information a couple of times, but I haven't experienced hostility.
And your audiences, as you said before, are open to the information, but how well informed are they in general when you talk to them?
In every audience, there are a few people who know quite a bit. But in general, I would say people are not informed. For example, you ask about U.S. policies and efforts. I learned from a professor when I was in Abu Dhabi who was with the negotiators at Taba in January of 2001 under Bill Clinton's last effort. He told me that they wanted to exchange 4 areas where settlers were living on the West Bank, Israeli settlers, and they wanted to exchange those 4 areas with 4 areas that were in Israel that they could exchange. Mm-hmm. And I was blown away by that. I didn't realize that we were that close to an agreement. So I think with my interest that I didn't know this, I'm sure that most Americans don't know that those talks are so close and yet so far.
Yeah, they were close. Some people, of course, said that they got close because they knew that they were both leaving office and would have no possibility of ever implementing those. But certainly as an example, it showed how close we were. Do you think people know much about the years before Israel was established?
No, not at all. I'm really a history teacher. I taught some of that history in my history class after World War I. That period was so important in the Middle East and setting the stage for what happened afterwards. And I thought it was an appropriate time for my students to learn about that. But I don't get the feeling that anything like Middle East history is taught in American schools unless you're at the college level and you're doing a major in something like that.
Unless you have a special interest in the subject.
Right.
Well, that certainly makes efforts of people like you very valuable. It's a large potential audience out there to reach in 50 different states.
Yes. Well, there are organizations in every state that are doing the same thing that we're doing, but I'm sure they all experience the same problem of venues.
We have a call here now from Elizabeth in Miami who'd like to speak to us. Please go ahead, Elizabeth.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, very good.
Nora, where are you based in? You're in D.C.?
I'm in D.C.
Oh, okay. I'm just curious how the latest events surrounding the additional settlement in East Jerusalem, they're obviously a hindrance, and I'm just wondering how is it that you can work around these issues which to me are like almost impossible because...
How do you mean work around? What do you mean?
There's always an impediment, and the never-ending peace process doesn't seem like it's evolving anywhere other than there's more hindrances, there's more obstacles.
I'm not understanding what you mean by...
I think perhaps you're suggesting that in terms of trying to convince people that this is an area where you can make progress and that they should be concerned about, suddenly yet another obstacle makes it seem impossible. Is that
what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that this is something that keeps on coming up, and how is it that we can actually attain peace or have peace as something that is obviously a goal for all of us, but...
The feeling that peace or a settlement of some sort is coming up because there's this great rush to settle more Israeli settlers in Jerusalem. The ambassador said there are over 500,000, and half of those are in Jerusalem, and now people are coming in waves and droves. I speculate that the government of Israel wants to make more facts on the ground, particularly in Jerusalem, because the concern of Jerusalem as the capital of one state or two states, or whether it might be internationally administered, as was the agreement in 1948. They're particularly worried about losing a piece of Jerusalem, and that's why this activity has gotten so hot. If you ask me, what do? We keep on keeping on. We do what we've been doing, whatever happens.
I guess more power to all of us.
I think this raises the issue, too, whether the United States has to play a more active role and give its own opinions as to what needs to be the outline of a settlement. My impression from indirect involvement from the issue, including at Madrid, is that the efforts to see just the two sides as equals who need to be told to sit down and negotiate together has really not worked, and that we need a more active United States role. After all, most people would say the outline of the settlement is pretty clear, and it involves going back to the Resolution 242 and to the 67 boundaries, and you have 500,000 settlers to deal with. This is not an issue which will take care of itself, perhaps.
I understand from a speaker I heard long ago at one of the organizations here in Washington. When he was asked about the settlers, he said, well, he didn't think it was as big a problem as we thought, because he thought 80% of the settlers were not religious, were not settling what they called Judea and Samaria for religious reasons. They were people who had gotten a very nice deal on their mortgage and had lovely housing and so on, and people who would be happy to move back to Israel if they were given as good a deal. My thought is, and actually the rabbi from the Shalom Center made this same suggestion, that the United States put into escrow the money that we normally give Israel and say that this money can be used only to resettle settlers, Israeli settlers, from the West Bank to Israel.
Well, that's a good point.
That would be a brilliant idea.
We're running out of time, so it's nice to end on an upbeat note. Thank you very much, Norwa, for coming to talk with us today and to share your experiences with us.
It's been lovely chatting with you.
Thank you. Your experiences with us.
It's been lovely chatting with you.
Thank you. Your experiences with us.